we are living in a time of great realignment, great transition, some kind of revolution that's technological and political and economic. And things are happening that no single individual fighting back is going to be able to stop or change. It's really a group enterprise at this point. We need to try a lot of different things. But if you're that single individual feeling that competition and feeling like you have to keep your edge, I think they're exactly right. But I think mindfulness could be really helpful in allowing them to see that it is not all on them to solve and to fix.
Welcome to the Mindfulness in Politics podcast, where each week we are bringing you insights and reflections into mindfulness-based practices that you can use to help make your work more sustainable, as well as other aspects of your life. And today we are excited to have a special guest with us, Jeff Krehely. And Igor, take it away and tell us a little bit about what Jeff is up to and why we are so excited to have him on the podcast.
Jeff is our first guest, and we couldn't think of anyone more fitting and deserving, especially to discuss our topic this week, Josh, which is how do you cultivate motivation in a moment and at a time when there's so many headwinds, there's so many challenges? How do you just keep going? Jeff is really a dear friend of mine. I met him back in 2008, 2009 at my very first job in politics. And when I think about cultivating motivation, Jeff comes to mind in two different ways. One is Jeff has really managed since we first met to reinvent himself in the way he thinks about the work in politics and advocacy, the role he plays in that world. And the second piece is Jeff's motivation to explore his interests and his passions outside of just politics, media, and advocacy. That is something that I've just really been impressed by, having the motivation, having the confidence to break out of the space that we all operate in and really try something new. So with that, Jeff, welcome to the Mindfulness in Politics podcast. We're so excited to have you on.
Thank you both. It's great to see you, and what an honor to be the first guest this early on.
You have been a practitioner for many, many years. Tell us a little bit about your practice and how you've used it to cultivate motivation.
I've had some form of a mindfulness practice for about 25 years now, which I'm 49, so pretty much all of my adult life, really. And it started back in my early mid-20s, kind of recognizing as somebody who grew up in a pretty small town in Pennsylvania and then went to a small college and then got to DC for grad school and work, that I'd been sheltered as a young gay man who grew up in the closet in those places, and then suddenly having this political policy professional career in a city, finally being able to be out and be myself. I realized I had quite a bit of anxiety and I had some depression to deal with. In some ways, those things serve me well in terms of motivators to get out there and achieve and work. But I realized that I was often living so much in my head and having so many racing thoughts and having so many just bundles of nerves constantly at the top of my mind where I couldn't really feel myself anchored in the world. And so I started therapy, and my therapist suggested meditation and thinking about how that could serve me. And he recommended a book called Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart. And it was
Epstein.
Yes. Yep. Mark Epstein. And it made a huge impact on me. And so I just started experimenting at a very basic level I remember I had these two classical music CDs because we still had CDs back then. But I think one was Vivaldi and one was Mozart. And I would just play them in my apartment in the dark with a couple candles burning and just try to sit there and breathe and notice my thoughts. There weren't podcasts then. There weren't all these tools that we now have at our disposal. And so I was just making it up as I went along based on what my therapist told me and what I had read in the book. And I was shocked to discover that all those thoughts running through my head were not real, that if I actually just allowed myself to pause and breathe and observe them, I didn't have to really be attached to them. And I didn't have to let them make me feel anxious. I didn't have to take action on them. And it was somewhat humbling because you think every thought you have is so important and powerful and you have to do these things. And then to realize that they're just like these things racing through your head that are chemicals in our brain that aren't necessarily real in in a material sense was something for me to really learn and reckon with and start developing some discernment about what I actually wanted to pay attention to.
So, Jeff, I'm curious, sometimes when we start to pay attention to those inner workings and become really aware of what's happening, it can actually expose us to things that for a while we had sort of been suppressing or trying not to think about. And I'm wondering if you had the experience at all that cultivating that kind of mindfulness actually temporarily made things more difficult before they got better.
Absolutely. That is the rocky road of mindfulness that I think so many of us are on. Some of the things I was realizing and understanding about myself through that practice. Growing up, I told myself once I was able to come out, I would want to have a long-term partner and kids and live in the suburbs and all those things. As I was doing this work, I realized, well, those are also thoughts going through my head that aren't necessarily my thoughts. And so one thing I started really reevaluating was, how did I actually want to live and structure my life? What was family going to mean to me? How was I going to navigate some of those questions? It also challenged some of the foundations of my relationship with my parents at the time, who were not terribly embracing and accepting of me being gay. I think, under a lot of the thoughts that I had were driven somewhat by the tension that I had with my parents, and really slowing down and paying attention to that made me realize I had some work to do with them to get to the kind of relationship I wanted to have with them. And in a lot of ways, starting to be more aware of what was going through my brain and why, it really pushed me to start reevaluating a lot of relationships that I had.
Our big theme this week is motivation. And I know, Jeff, from our offline conversations, that you've found a lot of additional motivation that's been beneficial to you, not only in motivating you in terms of your work in an era of a lot of cynicism and burnout, but also in terms of returning to some lifelong passions that are very meaningful to you, such as photography. And I know often there are a lot of tips or life hacks that people, particularly, the kind of self-help guru world, will offer about getting off the couch and into action for things you want to do. In my experience, though, I've actually found that a lot of the motivation that we seek to cultivate is actually not additive, but subtractive, that it is more about trying to clear out some of the BS and the distractions and the competing priorities for our time and attention that, frankly, 5 years from now, if we look back, are going to be like, well, why did I waste my time and energy on that, as opposed to this thing that actually is important to me and I want to be focusing on? So I'm wondering for you, where your mindfulness practice plugs into your increasing motivation.
I love the idea of that this isn't about adding something else to our schedules and making ourselves even more tired and worn down and burned out. For me, 15, 16 years ago, I did something called the Rockwood Leadership Institute, a program offered for a lot of us who work in progressive policy and politics to help us understand who we are, why we do the work we do, why we're called to it. And one exercise we did was basically writing our own obituary. And the purpose of that was to really think through, like, what impact you want to have on the world, and what you want to kind of have your personal mission statement or purpose statement be. I came up with one that was I want to leave the world a more compassionate and humane place. And so that really helped me keep my motivation doing my traditional political and policy work for a number of years. But then at the start of the pandemic, I was starting to feel that burnout feeling creeping in. And I realized that I had been ignoring some creative desires that I had my whole life. And if I was going to continue working full time in policy and politics, I was the COO of the Roosevelt Institute at the time. I couldn't do that and at the same time really embrace a creative practice that was very meaningful to me. So I had to really think carefully about how I could structure a new way of working so that I could make space for a photography practice, which is what the thing at the time that was really grabbing me and still is. I also thought it still aligned nicely with that purpose of wanting to make the world a more compassionate and humane place. I wasn't doing it by helping to change public policy and hopefully build a better politics, but I was doing it by capturing things that I thought were beautiful and inspiring, and bringing those to other people and helping people in a way that was very different than what I had been. I always had that nagging feeling that there was something else that I wanted to be doing, that there was a different way I wanted to be living. I'm certainly not going to name names, but there were people who were 10, 15, 20 years my senior in the workplace. They'd been in basically the same job or the same organization for quite some time. They didn't seem to really love what they were doing. They seemed, even more cynical than I can be. I always felt really badly for those people because they were great people. They had accomplished a lot at one time and they just seemed really stuck. And I was always convinced that there were other more interesting things that they probably wanted to be doing and they just hadn't figured out how to do it. And when I started to get that like creeping sense of burnout feeling happening, it just really made me take that step back and take stock of why that was. Where was that feeling coming from? What could I be doing to mollify it? But like I was terrified. And, there were, at least 2 years from the moment of me realizing this until I actually took action on it, because a lot of it was during the 2019, 2020, 2021 craziness that we were all living through. And so it didn't seem like the wisest time to be suddenly like jumping from full-time job with a salary and good benefits into doing consulting and coaching and trying to figure out how to be a photographer. But that nagging voice stayed with me. I talked with so many people about it at the time of like, what does this look like? And was really lucky to have a good community around me who could help me navigate it, help me think about the choices I had to make. And in some ways, that's kind of how like, mindfulness becomes part of your community. If we are mindful in the way we live our lives, we can actually have relationships with people that invite them into a sense of mindfulness. And that was a huge help for me to actually make the decision and make the jump into this kind of consulting, coaching, photography world that I have currently structured as my day-to-day existence.
So Jeff, this journey is really profound and inspiring to a lot of people, but I'm putting myself in the shoes of a listener who might be thinking, that's well and great, but I'm in this hyper competitive, high stress environment where I don't have a lot of leeway for anything but being super task and mission focused. And I'm worried that if I start dabbling in this kind of a practice, that I'm going to lose my edge or not be as able to be as I need to be to really be successful. What would be your takeaway for folks who have those concerns?
Those are super legitimate concerns. And, I fully recognize that my path isn't the path for everybody. And some people really want to stay in that full-time political policy space and they want to keep advancing. And I'm super grateful that we have those people, because we need them in so many different places and in so many different ways. I think if I were in those shoes today, and I've done this in the past, using mindfulness in that case to actually like do some real thinking and reflecting on what impact any single individual can have at this time in our society and world and politics, and not in a like self-defeating or self-deflating way, like, oh my God, I'm one person and we're living in this wild era, but more just to do a bit of a reality check on yourself, to understand that saving the world, saving the country, whatever that means to you, is not on any single individual's shoulders. That we are living in a time of great realignment, great transition, some kind of revolution that's technological and political and economic. And things are happening that no single individual fighting back is going to necessarily be able to stop or change. Like it's really a group enterprise at this point. We need to try a lot of different things. Some of them will work, some of them won't work. But if you're that single individual feeling that competition and feeling like you have to keep your edge, I think they're exactly right that that's the case. But I think mindfulness could be really helpful in allowing them to see that it is not all on them to solve and to fix. That kind of realization can create a little bit of space for breathing, for being human, for being compassionate to yourself, and actually steeling yourself for the long run and the fight that we're in. So I think there's quite a bit of power and strength gathering in bringing mindfulness into your life, into your career, even if you are focused on staying in this really hard charging political space that we're in.
Well, that's a beautiful place to leave us at. Jeff Krehely, thank you so much for joining the Mindfulness in Politics podcast.
Thanks, Jeff.
Me. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So thank you.